Hello, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you might be. My name is Sean and I'm delighted you're joining us for today's ESPC community webinar. This webinar is part of Microsoft Fabric Week, proudly sponsored by Acterace. Today I'm joined by Joseph Diatoni, MVP, who will present Getting Started with Data Governance in Microsoft Fabric. We love hearing guys have to say, so remember to join in conversation about today's webinar. Our handle is at ESPC_community and our hashtag is hashtag ESPC25. Tweet us, tag us, and tell us what you learned. Don't forget to check out our Learning Hub, which is updated with the latest blogs, ebooks, webinars, and how-to videos. You can access and view the Learning Hub by visiting our website, sharepointeurope.com, and clicking the Content tab at the top. Don't let the learning stop here. Continue to keep up and stay ahead by joining us for our next webinar, From Chaos to Trust, Governance Best Practices in Fabric, with Martha Mongan, MVP. This webinar will take place Wednesday, May 28th, 11 a.m. CEST. For more information on this webinar, please check out www.sharepointeurope.com/register for webinars. Looking to expand your Microsoft Fabric skills? Join us in Vienna, 15th to 18th September for the European Microsoft Fabric Community Conference. 3 keynotes, 10 full-day tutorials, and over 130 plus expert-led sessions covering data engineering, real-time analytics, business intelligence, and data governance and more. Sessions are delivered by Microsoft experts, community leaders, and Microsoft corporate speakers. Enjoy hands-on workshops, valuable networking, and memorable social events. Scan the QR code to get your ticket and use Fabric Week 150 for €150 off the current deal. FabCon Europe tutorials are here. We're excited to launch a series of hands-on tutorials focused on the latest innovations and practical applications of Microsoft Fabric. Topics include Microsoft Purview, Power BI, data warehousing, Fabric data agents, SQL databases, and more. Learn directly from experts and gain real-world skills that you can apply immediately. Use code FabricWeek150 to get €150 off your current deal. Limited time offer. After the webinar, we'll have a questions and answer session. Type any questions you might have into the questions box. Questions will be selected and answered at the end of the presentation. This webinar will be recorded and added to the Resource Center, where you'll be notified by email when it's available. And now I'm going to pass you over to today's webinar presenter, Joseph. Hello, Joseph. Thanks for joining us today.
Hey, thanks, Sean. And I'll share my screen right now.
Yeah, I can see your screen perfectly.
Cool. Thank you very much, and welcome everyone. This is Getting Started with Data Governance in Microsoft Fabric, and I'm Joey D'Antoni. Today we're going to kind of talk about a few topics as they relate to data governance in Microsoft Fabric. So this is a session I did at FabCon EU last year, and I wanted to kind of put together an overview of some best practices and policies around data governance in general, what your options are in Fabric, what you can do in Purview, and some of the challenges you may face, both kind of organizationally and functionally in implementing a data governance strategy. One of the challenges I see as a consultant from day to day and in managing data governance is that because it is associated with data and that sort of thing in systems like Fabric or Databricks or Snowflake, a lot of times organizations will treat data governance as an IT problem, and it's really not an IT problem. IT gets enlisted to solve it, and sometimes we'll use tools, whether they be Microsoft Purview or Unity Catalog and Databricks, that aim to solve data governance problems. However, data governance is really an organizational problem because as a technology professional, you don't maybe inherently know what the master sales data list should be, or who our core vendors is, and you're at best guessing some of those things. Likewise, you don't necessarily understand how organizational policy should work, and you need to involve the business in some of those things. And IT should definitely be involved because they're going to be facilitating things through security models and frameworks and things like that. But at its heart, governance is really a business function. In governance, I also kind of can't emphasize the importance of it. It helps you on so many levels, whether it be data quality, data security, doing things like attributing extra protections for really sensitive or really critical data. It can even help you with things like GDPR, because the classic example I always like to use is British Airways had a data breach several years ago, and in their appeal, their initial fine was, I think, hundreds of millions of pounds. And in their appeal, they were able to show that they knew exactly what data was breached because they had some reasonable governance policies in place. And by having that level of organizational control, you're better protected against audit. So let's kind of dive into this presentation. This is going to be about 15 minutes. We'll leave about 10 minutes for questions at the end. I'm Joey D'Antoni. I'm Principal Cloud Architect. It says Design Mind there. We were acquired in March by 3Cloud, which is the logo on the right. I've been a Microsoft Data Platform MVP since 2013. I was a VMware vExpert. I did not get that renewed this year. I should update this slide. You can find me online on Blue Sky and LinkedIn. I write at joeydantoni.com. I also do some blogging at redmondmag.com. And last week with Microsoft Build, I released a number of columns on some of the things around the SQL Server 2025 launch. And I also had the chance to interview Shirish Tota, who's the CVP for Azure Data at Microsoft, around the launch of SQL 2025. So there's some really good content I put out there. It's all on my LinkedIn. I'll probably push a summary of that later today, but check that stuff out. So what we're going to cover in today's talk, I kind of break this talk down into 4 sections, and we kind of go from, not so technical to more technical. We're going to talk about understanding data governance and understanding what the concepts and frameworks are for a data governance solution. So I like this because it helps you break down the roles and the understanding of what you need to do, because the term data governance gets tossed around a lot in terms of what should we be doing, how should we be managing our data, and it's kind of all encompassing around data lineage, security, data control, so that in your organization you have a clear path for identifying your important data, how it should be handled, how it should be secured, what policies apply to that data, who can use it, all those things. We're also going to talk about kind of an introductory framework for how to do data governance in an organization. Like I mentioned, this works best when it's driven from the top of your organization down. So it's definitely something you want to have executive support for. And that's something that I think is most critical. One of the challenges I think around this space right now, particularly, is that there's a lot of AI buzzwords around data governance, and there are some places where AI can potentially help, but it's not just like anything else. This isn't really a technology problem, it's a process problem. So AI can help you a little bit in identifying what data lives where, but it's not going to solve the problem for you. It's not going to fix your change data management, or you're managing what your master data looks like. None of that's going to happen. We're going to talk about the governance tools that are within Fabric. Fabric does have a limited set of data governance tools. A lot of these kind of translate back from what was in Power BI, if you remember some of the certified data sets and things like that. We have some kind of lightweight tools in Fabric. If you're a very small organization who's coming from a Power BI background, you can probably take advantage of the data governance solutions that are available in Fabric to kind of put together something. It's more like a tagging solution. I wouldn't call it anywhere near a mature solution, but for a small organization, there's enough there that you can kind of get started. And then finally, we're going to talk about using Purview and Fabric. And the integration between Purview and Fabric is not as seamless as I would like it to be, but it does build some nice frameworks to get you going with data governance practices. It's not, I'll be perfectly honest, I don't think it's quite as seamless as Unity Catalog is and Databricks, but it is a framework to get you started. And if you're anything larger than 5 to 10 folks that are using Fabric for kind of Power BI reporting and maybe some light data engineering, you're probably going to want to have something robust like that. So let's get started with the presentation. Technology plays a significant role in helping organizations manage all of these kinds of components that we have. But really, when we think about governance, it's the behavior of the people who are using the technology that determine whether the data is being used to drive institutional success. And when we talk about data governance, it's all about controlling the way people behave with regards to data and data technology. Specifically, it's identifying the appropriate people to steward or manage and govern various types of data that we have in our organizations. It sets policies outlining the appropriate rules of behavior around that data, and it embeds those rules into everyday processes across the institution. This is the National Institute of Standards and Technologies, which, as far as I know, still exists in my country at the moment, which is kind of a mess. But they do a really good job of defining technology things, or at least they did. But this defines data governance as a set of processes that ensures data governance are formally managed throughout the enterprise. A data governance model establishes authority and management in the decision-making parameters related to data produced by the or managed by the enterprise. Where this gets really challenging, and I think kind of technically challenging too, is a lot of these data governance frameworks and things are just that, they're frameworks. And there's no universally adopted ideal data governance framework. There are best practices and standards that a lot of organizations use, but in a sense, I was talking to a colleague this morning who works in a large European insurance company, and there's just not, for example, in Fabric, there's just not a seamless way to integrate with the policies they have. For example, in Azure, we have policy. So if we're meeting a specific regulatory policy or a specific framework, we can implement policy in Azure that will limit the options that users have. In Fabric, we don't have policy, so we have to kind of cobble that together ourselves. So let's talk about that, how it works in reality. So how data governance can help you with compliance and security. And given this is a European audience, I'm assuming you're pretty familiar with GDPR, or the EU General Data Protection Act. In the US, the only thing we really have in that regard is the California Consumer Privacy Act, but this is just but one aspect of regulatory compliance. I worked in pharmaceuticals. My wife works for a financial company. They have lots of their own sets of rules, like, Sarbanes-Oxley, or the healthcare privacy mandates like we have in the US, like HIPAA, which is the Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act. One aspect of this, and really where this integrates into IT and technology, is that data governance is typically required to meet those regulatory needs, and your organization needs to be able to address regulatory compliance and industry mandates. And as always, your number one job is to stay out of jail. This is something I learned during my master's program in business, and it's probably more of a US thing than the EU thing, because we tend to be more of, we like our jails, but we don't like to send, we don't want to go to jail for just doing our job. But a data governance framework is going to enable you to do regulatory compliance with policy mandates. And there are a few aspects of this, but defining and classifying regulated data in the scope of regulations. I know when I worked for a pharmaceutical company, this was really a key aspect. For systems that impacted manufacturing and were therefore subject to the manufacturing regulations, we had to have a whole different set of change controls and frameworks for what we did, as opposed to normal, just or I guess like a file server would be an example of something that didn't have impact. But if it was a business system that managed lab results or something like that, it was treated completely differently. You also need to determine how, why, and where your company accesses, moves, and uses regulated data. This can be, especially in a cloud world, this can be determining what regions data can live in. It can determine rights around moving data and how that data gets accessed, who can access that data, what the life cycle of that data is. We're also going to talk about managing the appropriate rights within your organization, including data subject consent, so who has access to what. If we do this well, it does make role-based access control easier to configure, so that we have a better understanding of what groups need access to what data. You also want to be able to evaluate risk exposure, so you can remediate with protection and disposition data accordingly. Identifying those key compliance and regulatory mandates is a critical part of any data governance assessment. And honestly, those mandates and those regulations, we get frustrated with them, but they're the one thing in my experience in 20 plus years of IT work that gets organizations to spend money on things like governance, because otherwise they tend to care far less about data quality unless they like go to sell the company and they can't value it. But they do care about not getting those fines and not being in the news and not going to jail. So those regulatory constraints do help you get investment into things like data governance. And obviously you risk non-compliance when you're not aware of the regulations or regional laws. And this is really going to help once you understand what your compliance rules are. You can build the data governance to meet those needs, and you can add advanced capabilities like data discovery, data masking for anonymization of data, and even metadata management, so that you can ensure your governance program can evolve. And let's talk about kind of the pillars of data governance here. When we talk about security, it's really a key aspect, and I think this is the other component of IT that we see increased spending in data governance in recent years. One of the big reasons for this is cybersecurity insurance. As we see, more and more organizations have things like ransomware attacks. Those organizations have tried to engage cybersecurity insurance to protect them against such attacks, or at least help them mitigate those attacks. And in doing so, you have to meet kind of a baseline audit criteria to be able to do that. And this has led to kind of more security spending as well. But data security as a component of data governance is really focused on protecting data. And this access might be from, unauthorized users, data corruption like ransomware attacks, or data breaches. And the data security aim here is to ensure confidentiality, integrity, and availability of the data. There are a number of ways we're going to protect this data, and this can be encryption, tokenization, access controls, network security. But this is all something we need to be concerned about. The other aspects, like we talk about, are compliance, obviously, and compliance and security here have a pretty big overlap. Most of the controls we're going to put in place for compliance are definitely related to security and tied into those regulatory functions. However, when we talk about data quality, this kind of goes away from those other two things. And data quality is where this gets kind of interesting to the business, right? Because my favorite, one of my favorite consulting stories is I was engaged to help this auto parts manufacturer build a data warehouse. And the reason why I had to do this was because they were trying to sell the company, and their accounting was so bad they couldn't actually get a valuation in the company. So like typically when you sell a company, depending on the industry you're in, it will sell for 3 to 7 times your annual earnings. Well, if you can't accurately report your annual earnings, it becomes very hard to identify what the value of the company is. In this case, by building a data warehouse, we were able to kind of improve their data quality and get them to a place where we could evaluate the data. That's kind of an extreme example of how bad organizational data quality could be. But in a lot of larger organizations, even I've seen it really hard to identify the single source of the truth. There's this kind of midpoint in organizational size, in my experience, where you see organizations that have pretty solid data quality because their systems landscape isn't so complex that there are 25 different sources of truth that are systems. They're 2 or 3. When you get into large organizations, just about every large enterprise I've ever worked with has every BI tool, not just Power BI and Fabric. They have, Talend, they have Qlik, they have Tableau. They have multiple different data warehouses for different business units, and getting all of that data together is much more difficult proposition. So the data quality aspect is most easily achieved in I'd say medium-sized organizations, and it's an important thing to think about as a BI engineer. And this is kind of a place where you do have to work with the business to understand what ETL things need to happen to make data make sense. What the business flow of the data is. You can't simply assume that, unfortunately, you can't simply assume that just sales coming into the data warehouse are purely sales and don't have to be modified for returns and things like that later. There's a lot of aspects to data quality, and this is one of the probably trickiest parts, because security and compliance are fairly straightforward. You make your assessment, you update those assessments every 6 months. Data quality rules can change over time as you do different promotions or different sorts of business solutions. And then finally, usability. And this kind of overlaps with all 3 of these, because data quality is important here, but also allowing your users to have access to the data they need. without overly destroying the security aspects of that. You don't want the entire organization to have access to all the data in the organization, but at the same time, you don't want security rules that are so complex that users can only see some subsets of data, and it's a real challenge in balancing out those needs, and that's really where usability comes in. This is also where it's really, to me, important to have representation in your data governance organization from multiple parts of the business. And typically, we'll talk a little bit more about this in the next couple of slides, but we'll have representation and data stewards from not just the IT parts of your organization, not just security. You want to have users so that they have understanding of how those things work. This next slide, I kind of always like to talk about it because it's really kind of unfortunate that this lands in IT's lap so much. IT has the knowledge and skills to govern its own data. And by its own data, I mean, if you want to manage a list of servers or virtual machines or cloud components or even employees in your organization, you'd have the skill set and the core data knowledge to know that. Organizational data, on the other hand, so things like sales data, customer data, manufacturing data, that is really out of, not make a pun here, but that is really out of IT's purview, right? It's not something, IT may know about that data. They may have some rough understanding of the business process, kind of in the way that a lawyer might have some rough understanding of the business process, but it's not their job to know the data exactly. And when we talk about this, data governance is going to typically involve a number of disciplines. So we're going to have data management, data quality, data policy, data privacy, and business process management. And typically, when you have a well-designed data governance team and organization, it's going to include various roles and responsibilities. I think the most important one here is that you have a senior executive who oversees the program, and you have support from that senior executive. The reason why it's so important here to have senior executive support is that this is a cross-functional exercise, right? So you need somebody who's above all of the middle managers of the people who need to commit time to this effort that frankly isn't going to make anyone money inherently. It's just going to improve your overall outcomes. So having that executive leadership is important. Under that, you're typically going to have a steering committee or council that's going to act as the governing body for your data governance effort, and a group of data stewards. These data stewards are going to work together for creating standards and policies for governing data. That means how you handle change, how you handle defining master data, as well as the implementation and enforcement procedures that are primarily going to be carried out by the data stewards. Ideally, executives and other representatives from an organization's business operations take part in addition to the IT and data management teams. And really, data governance is a core component of your overall data management strategy, but organizations need to focus on the expected business benefits of a governance program for it to be successful, starting in the early days of an initiative. Chief Data Officer Eric Hishorn at the Mellon Bank in New York made the same point during Enterprise Data World, where he said outcomes just can't be good governance. They have to be running a better business. So you have to support your business and help your business define better data outcomes. And that's really how you drive value from a data governance program. But this is not just simply an IT problem. And if you try to manage it as an IT problem, you're not going to be successful because IT is not going to be able to drive those business outcomes. So this culture of data governance is something we kind of need to define. And this is something where having that executive leadership who can build cross-functional programs can really help your organization, because you want not just your users or not just your business leaders, but you want kind of everybody to think about the quality of the data in the organization. And you want to build this value around data governance. So as a business leader, you need to understand that data governance is more than just compliance, but really it helps accelerate business value to get sponsorship and shared accountability across the organization. If you don't have quality data in your org, you make slower decisions, these are all kinds of problems that we see. You have to spend more on security because you're trying to secure more data than you probably absolutely need to secure. It's multiple levels of problems. Data owners and stewards can cultivate active engagement and instill purposeful ownership with data leaders on their teams that have expertise in domain context. And that's why it's so important for this to be cross-functional, because I remember in one of my older jobs, I did a data governance project, and we were doing the discovery phase of the project. And one of the challenges was, and this is probably in every organization, there's always this process that takes place that I like to call Excel ETL. And that's when the data comes from the data warehouse, even Power BI or Tableau or something. But you have end users who ingest that data into Excel, and they do some additional manipulations that you're not inherently aware of as IT, and that's how the books get closed at the end of the quarter. So that's kind of an important challenge to understand, and having those data stewards that are within the organization to do those sorts of tasks can really help you, because they'll have that more robust, complete understanding of what the data picture looks like. So building your own framework here, and this is kind of the approach that a lot of organizations take. And like I say, this needs to be a big initiative, and we'll start talking about the tooling and how you implement it from an IT perspective, but this is kind of the last slide on the framework. Having a small data governance team can be challenging. If your data governance team, meets quarterly, it's also something that's challenging. They need to meet on a regular basis, and because data changes, you have various vendor systems that go through upgrades. You see all sorts of changes. Different security rules and policies may come out and affect how you implement various solutions. So keeping these teams up to date and a relatively large team that has cross-functional representation is really important. And having bottom-up data management approach can make data creators responsible for their own governance. So if you have data sources in your organization, they should be responsible for the data quality. Some of that kind of overlaps. I don't know if anybody's studied data mesh versus data fabric, but if you go kind of to a data mesh model, in a data mesh model, the data creators are responsible for their own kind of data governance. But beyond compliance, you just want to have more accurate data. So you want to build those frameworks and get those in place with those outcomes as goals. So having more accurate, easier to close data. One of the better metrics I've seen for quality of data governance is any reduction in quarter or month end or year end close times, because of those solutions. So let's kind of shift focus. We've talked about frameworks and the how and the why we want to do data governance organizationally, but now we're going to talk about some of the practical things we need to do, and we're going to talk about some tools that are in place, and some of these are more robust than others, but we'll talk about first external data catalogs. I think having a data catalog is probably the most important aspect of any data governance program, just from like a technology or an organizational perspective, because it's simply having knowledge of where all your data is, what it represents, is really the hardest part. So pick your flavor of data catalog, have one, maintain it, keep it up. That will be a great first step in building a data governance practice in your organization. Some other tools here I wanted to call out. Irwin, this is a data engineering, or data architecture tool that allows you to store your metadata in databases and extend them. It's something I just don't see a lot of organizations do anymore, where you have a database architecture tool that you can use. Very cool. Talon, kind of an ETL tool, they have a data catalog component. Databricks Unity Catalog, something that's extremely popular with a lot of the enterprise customers I come across nowadays. Databricks I think this is probably one of their, I know this is a Fabric talk, and we're a little bit verboten from speaking about Databricks, but they've done a really good job with the Unity Catalog. It does integrate with Fabric. You can with a big asterisk, you can pull some of the data in from Unity Catalog into your Fabric environment. I will mention Fabric as a data governance tool here holistically. I think it's limited, the options you have there that are native to Fabric, and really you need the integration with Purview. And this is just kind of a subset of some of the data governance tools that are available in the marketplace. There are a lot more. As I mentioned, there's a lot of AI introduction in the space, just kind of like any other space right now, because it's the hot marketing term. There are some kind of interesting use cases around AI scanning for identifying your data sets. This isn't going to solve all of your governance problems in one shot, but it can be helpful in like identifying potentially PII data. It can also, if it's not done well, it can generate a lot more overhead and work for you. So keep all of those things in mind. So when we start these data governance journeys, we want to think about several things. We want to anchor in business value. So as we mentioned over and over again, business project, not IT project. So you want to tie this to some business value, and ideally that's where your executive support comes in and helps you define what that is. You also want to think big. You want large organization-wide data governance, so that you're better off from a data perspective than you were 6 months ago. But you also have to start on small scale. So I always, from a project management approach, I always like to start on kind of lowest work, highest impact sort of solutions, but also high visibility. So if you can identify something that's high visibility and it's going to have a decent amount of impact, but doesn't require you to completely re-engineer 12 business processes, that's probably a good place to get started. You want kind of progression over perfection. Data governance is always going to be an evolving process. Like I mentioned, those really good metrics are like month end and quarter end kind of closing times. If you can improve that, that shows you're making progress. You're never going to have perfection in data governance. It's, to me, probably one of the more frustrating aspects of IT. As somebody who's worked in just about every aspect of data, it's really hard to manage quality data, especially if you're in a small organization. You might be able to get to where you're pretty close to perfection. If you're in an enterprise, you're never going to get to perfection. Just do the best you can. And remember, this is a federated team sport, so we're going to build cross-functional teams that work together. I used to race bicycles, and it's kind of like when you have an alliance between two teams to chase down a leader in a stage race. You're going to have team members on different teams. You might have consultants. You might have multiple solutions, but it's important to kind of understand that you're going to have to work cross-functionally and bring those things together, because it's not. This is hard, right? This is not something we can just easily do. So let's talk about how we start to build some of these data governance characteristics. So I think it's pretty compelling in talking about some of the stories. Robust frameworks are going to include several key functions that we have. We want to define a data catalog, have a process for data discovery, and our main features. So our process of data cataloging and discovery is going to include maintaining a physical record of the organization's medical data and data assets in a unified and scalable manner. This is what's going to enable things like automatic identification, description, and logical search and discovery. And this is kind of where some of those AI tools can come into play, but you have to have things sort of organized before you start to use them. If you're not familiar with the term metadata, it's going to be the technical properties of the data set and the business metadata. Those technical properties are going to include things like data schema and structure, physical location of where that data lives, what cloud regions it's in, which of your data centers it's in, the type of data, the format, the approximate size, and the lineage, the lineage being kind of the history of the data. The business metadata is going to include related glossary terms, who owns the data, who the data stewards are, what the data classifications are, like what regulations it's affected by, the data sensitivity, and anything else you would like to add to that to kind of further enrich your business data. But that's going to be the main goal there. Our data catalog itself is going to be a central collection of that enterprise metadata. Ideally, it's going to offer us a unified view to manage the organization's data, which is critical for meeting regulations like GDPR, but it's also going to give us insights on how the data is being created and used across the data estate. At a minimum, it needs to include that data set metadata. Ideally, those metadata updates happen regularly and automatically at scale, generally through data source scanning, which is going to capture all of that technical metadata and potentially include data lineage. And that catalog should give us the ability to curate and enrich data. And that can be business specific information with glossary terms. It should also enable automatic classification of the data set at scale for effective governance. And our catalog should also allow users to efficiently search and browse for data sets across that technical metadata dimensions and business semantics. Users should be able to quickly evaluate data sets to determine if they're fit for the intended purpose. And this can be done by allowing data set previews, downloading sample data, showing that lineage information, and talking about data sensitivity. We should also have further data discovery by providing data intelligence in the organization. This helps us develop new data products and services that scale governance, protect data from risk exposure, and better allow business users to capture new insights and opportunities. And that data synchronization, that data discovery should support metadata synchronization. When you're talking about a very large enterprise, you might have several divisions, subsidiaries, or companies with different data catalogs that use one or several technologies. It's really common to see a need for data discovery across the entire enterprise. And the way we have to do that, and this is really technically and functionally challenging, but is to synchronize metadata, like data catalogs data. And the Azure Architecture Center can help you do that through Purview. And part of this is when we start talking about medallion architecture and how we take advantage of some of these solutions. We should also have our business domains here, and those definitions and those business concepts like OKRs and CDEs, these should all be shared across and available to the organization. We should take advantage of some machine learning approaches, and this is where we start to get into more advanced territory when you're further along your data governance journey. We have Purview can do database-based data discovery, and it can also do labeling. And this gives us kind of a centralized approach for how we do things. So let's talk about data governance in Fabric. And this, to me, is something I wish the team would have spent more time. Microsoft has had fits and starts around data governance tools, and I think Purview is a really good tool. It's not quite as tightly integrated with Fabric as I would like it to be. We're going to talk about that integration in the next few slides, but there are limits as to how good it is. I wish it was a little bit better. And like I mentioned, I was just talking to a colleague about this before. Fabric isn't Azure, and I think ultimately that's a lot of the source of some of the frustrations we encounter, because Azure has things like policy, right? So we can define Azure policy. So I can say data can only live, or resources can only be deployed in the following 5 regions that are inside of the EU and in our trusted boundary. Fabric doesn't have that. So we have to implement other controls in order to do that. And typically the way we're going to do that is through security controls, which is a messier way of doing it than if we had something like policy where we could just more easily manage it. So it is a little bit challenging, and we'll talk about kind of how we manage things. And the Fabric admin portal is a central place where you manage your organization's capacity to control your overall data estate. These are the settings that govern Fabric. So you can make changes to your tenant settings, you can govern capacities, domains, and workspaces, and control how users interact with Fabric. In order to provide flexibility, some of these things can be delegated down to capacities, domains, and workspaces. And let's just talk through that, because I think this is an important security concept that ties into governance as well. In Fabric, if we think about Azure, we have at our highest level in Azure, we have a tenant, which is your effectively authentication realm. That's going to be the same thing in Fabric. In Azure, we have management groups and subscriptions. Subscriptions in Azure are kind of analogous to capacities in Fabric, and it's just a billing boundary. But in Fabric, we also have domains and workspaces. And workspaces are kind of like resource groups, and I guess domains are kind of like management groups. I don't know why we have to rename everything in Fabric, but these are just levels in your hierarchy of where you assign security permissions. And a domain, and Unfortunately, because we only have so many words where we can name things, the administrator of a domain is called domain admin. So if you're a former Windows admin, you'll appreciate why that's a bad name. But in Fabric, a domain is a way of logically grouping together all the data in an organization that is relevant to a particular area of field. One of the ways you can use this is to group data by business departments. So you might have departments to manage their own data according to specific regulations and needs. Multiple workspaces can belong to a single domain. Workspaces are pretty analogous to resource groups in Azure, and they're tied into the whole DevOps infrastructure in Azure, in Fabric. So we will typically do a deployment to a workspace. To me, this is kind of an interesting use of domains because you can define domains however you want. There's really no rules around it. You might use domains to define things organizationally, or you might also use them so that your development teams have higher levels of access in their development environments than they have in their production environments, because of the way workspaces have to be deployed around DevOps. So this is something that's quite challenging, and I would say is, in my opinion, something that's fairly immature in Fabric. I think the security model could be a lot more robust to better facilitate some of these governance and security requirements. The other aspect of governance in Fabric, and this is kind of opening where I think it's Microsoft's trying to open things to third parties and do some things themselves in Fabric. There's a functionality called metadata scanning, which helps facilitate things like Purview by making it possible for cataloging tools to catalog and report on the metadata of all your organization's Fabric items. And it uses this via a set of admin REST APIs that are collectively known as the scanner API. And this depends on you having things like metadata items like item name, ID, sensitivity, and endorsement status all defined on your items. And then the scanner APIs can pull that in. Purview is going to be the little bit more robust solution for data governance in Fabric. It goes well beyond Fabric across your data estate, but the integration here makes it possible to use Purview's capabilities to govern and monitor your Fabric data in the context of your organization's entire IT systems. So Fabric gives us a couple of tools around data governance. And like I mentioned, I think these are important to understand because they do play into some of the Purview stuff. I don't think this is a complete governance system in and of itself, but it's important to kind of understand it. So you can endorse things, and this was a Power BI feature that rolled into Fabric. And endorsing things simply makes it easier for users in an organization to find high quality, trustworthy content and data. Those endorsed items are clearly labeled in the user interface with a badge, and in some lists they are given precedence and presented first. The other aspect of this is in modern BI processes, understanding the flow of data from the data source to the destination can be quite a challenge, especially if you build advanced analytical projects that span multiple data sources, data items, or have dependencies. So if you have questions like, what happens if I change this data? Or, why isn't this report up to date? They can be hard to answer. And Fabric helps us with this through lineage view displays. And this is a pretty cool feature. So all of the items in the workspace will show you how they're connected to each other. And it can show you upstream connections outside the workspace, one level up. So you can tell if an item is outside the workspace because the name of an external workspace is indicated. So if you see something like the HQL or the HR data KQL database in this image, it's external to this. So we can see, let me highlight on the screen. We can see here, this belongs to the sales and marketing group. And we can see that's external. That's one level up. And when we make changes to a Fabric item or considering making changes, we can do an impact analysis to get the impact of the assessment. So we'll show you the workspace and Fabric items that might be affected by the change. For data sources, we would only see direct children. To see further downstream, we would have to do multiple impact analyses. But it does allow you to view affected views and things like that. The other thing we have in Fabric from a governance perspective is endorsements. And there are 3 levels of endorsements here. And we have a promoted item, like we mentioned earlier, and it means the item creators think the item is ready for sharing and reuse. Any Fabric or Power BI item, except for Power BI dashboards, can be promoted, and any user with right permissions can promote an item. Certified, on the other hand, it means that an organization authorized reviewer has certified the data quality standards, and this data can be regarded as reliable and authoritative and is ready for use. Likewise, anything except Power BI dashboards can be certified, and any user can request certification for an item, but only a Fabric administrator can actually certify the items. Similarly, master data is a kind of a special badge in Fabric. It means the data is the core source of organizational data, truly being master data. This is often used to indicate that a data item is regarded to be an authoritative, single source of truth for certain types of org or business data like product codes or customer lists. This label can only be applied to items that contain data like lakehouses and semantic models, and only users specified by the Fabric administrator can label items as master data. That's kind of it in terms of data governance in Fabric. And I know that's kind of light, but that's what we have, and that's really where Purview comes in. And Purview and Fabric are really part of this Microsoft Intelligent Data Platform that allows you to govern your data. And if you're not familiar with Purview, it's a family of data governance, risk, security, and compliance solutions that help your organization protect your data. Purview is its own software as platform as a service offering, helps you identify data risk, includes some data loss protection efforts, gets you started with regulatory compliance, gives you a data catalog and a data map, and can scan your data. It's a really powerful set of tooling. It also curates data for you by gathering that metadata and lineage and all of those information. There's also data discovery, where it scans across various APIs. This is built on top of an open source project called Apache Atlas, with some additional functionality built into it. And there's also Purview Data Catalog, which exposes the metadata captured from all of the sources feeding your data platform. And customers can search for data and items they're interested in working without having to know which systems house those data. All Fabric metadata is available inside of Purview when you do the integration. And we have, this is just an example, we have the centralized page in Fabric. This is called Purview Hub, that helps administrators and users kind of govern and manage their Fabric data estate. It's going to provide reports that contain insights about sensitive data, item endorsement, and also serve as a gateway for some of the advanced capabilities in Purview, like data loss protection, prevention, and audit. The Purview Hub has a view for Fabric administrators as well as non-admin users. So the administrators are going to be able to see things like insights concerning their data estate. They'll also see links to the compliance rules. Other users will see insights about their own Fabric content and links to capabilities to further explore their data. So depending on who you are when you log in, the appropriate hub will open. We also have insights here as part of this solution. And this report, this insights report, is going to give you an overview. So an overview of the distribution of endorsement and sensitivity labeling. There's a specific endorsement report that's going to give us drill down analysis of the use of endorsement. We also have a sensitivity report, which likewise is going to show us about how things are labeled from a sensitivity labeling perspective. Inventory report, where we can see those labeled and endorsed items, filtered by workspace, by item type, date ranges, and things like that. And then a sensitivity page. So really, this is kind of like I'd argue like a data risk perspective. This is something that's really important, but it gives you a single place to look and analyze what kind of sensitive data you have, how well your data is labeled. And this is where you get into a little bit of challenge, because right, it's not, you have to ensure that those data items are labeled and from a sensitivity perspective and endorsed and all those things. So all of this kind of works together, which leads me to say data governance is a business function, and the ultimate objective is your data governance strategy is to generate the greatest possible return on data. Having a framework in place is going to help you capture critical opportunities to leverage data assets. It's really going to help you avoid those risks in terms of exposure. And the critical aspects of this are people. People, by far the biggest aspect. I know we have 4 in this slide, but governance is succeeds when there is collaboration and planning between groups. People need to determine the technology requirements, define the policies and processes that drive those, and then also support strategic objectives. The points you need to consider are, do you have people who are committed to data governance? More importantly, do their bosses support data governance? Have you formally defined their roles and responsibilities? And do they have the skills along with understanding the data in their organizations? And also, have you developed a change management plan, which includes your sponsors, that it supports alignment and buy-in? Likewise, and this ties into that change management plan, you need to have good processes. You need to have processes that aren't hard to do. And I know this is always tricky, balancing friction versus ease of getting things in. But have you modernized your business processes? And did you review your business rules around your data to integrate data governance into them? Contributors, so you need, as subject matter experts who can give you context. These are business leaders, process owners, and data stewards who run the upstream and downstream processes impacted by your data governance. And then the last point on this slide, and there's a reason why I made it the last point, is technology. These provide frameworks, but the tools, Purview won't solve your data governance problems. Keep that in mind. At the end of the day, this is a people problem. And to summarize, while data governance is not the most exciting topic, we're not talking about cost or how to do magic cool things in Fabric. It is one of the most important in terms of data security, helping keep your executives out of jail, avoiding large fines. And remember, establishing that data governance framework is not a technology function, it's a business function that is supported by the technology organization. So it's not that your technology organization is not going to be involved in a data governance effort, it's just not going to drive the whole thing. And then finally, having good governance improves both your security posture and your compliance posture and can deliver better business outcomes. So if you have better data, you're going to make faster decisions, you're going to make more efficient decisions, and all of those things are going to be excellent and help you. Here is my contact info. If you have any questions, feel free to shoot me an email. I'm Joey at joeydantoni.com. Back when I was on Twitter, I was at jdanton. I'm joeydantoni.com on Blue Sky. My blog is joeydantoni.com, and you can find me on redmondmag.com, where I have a column called Joey on SQL. With that, Sean, do we have any questions?
Yeah, there's loads of questions in. So I'll just go for the first question there. So could you comment on the current limitations of Microsoft Purview when scanning Fabric lakehouses or warehouses, especially the fact that it does not recognize individual columns within a table as a separate asset types? This makes it difficult to manage data governance at the column level unless the data has already been surfaced in a downstream semantic model, i.e., it is a data product in the eyes of Purview. Are there any plans to address this, or is there a recommended workaround for column level lineage and governance in the meantime?
Yeah, that's a very good question. It's frustrating. Fabric, in a lot of ways, even though it's 2 years in, is still an immature product. And it's something that has challenged, I think, all of us. And in this scenario, where I've had customers do workarounds, probably the most common use case I've seen for using Azure data or SQL database in Fabric has been for metadata information. So collecting your own metadata information, ingesting it into the Fabric database and letting Purview talk to that, or just an Azure SQL database in general, having some like external system where Purview can talk. It's not a good solution. It's frustrating to me that it doesn't work in one shot like it should. But yeah, that's really the only way, is getting it into another solution. I did see some creative things where people were like pushing Fabric data into Unity Catalog via APIs. It's probably a little bit beyond my skill level, but yeah, it's frustrating that we still have some of these limitations a couple of years in.
Perfect. So the next question is, hi, curious to hear your thoughts on OneLake's security.
I'm a Microsoft Data Platform MVP, and I'd like to keep it. Once again, that's an area that is, in my opinion, the maturity level of the product there needs a lot of work. I would say in general, the maturity level of the security platform in Fabric is bad. Like it's in a small organization, it's manageable, but when you start to get into a large enterprise with some of the complexities you have with sharing with business partners and things like that, and data loss protection is still not supported in One Lake, and I think that's also a problem because like it's a kind of a big data exfiltration risk. Uh, I know Microsoft continues to invest there. I would like to see more things sooner rather than fancy new AI features. But I am not a PM, unfortunately.
Perfect. So the next question there is, hi Joseph, regarding structuring workspaces, would you recommend to use one workspace per bronze, silver, gold layer? Which impact can this have on governance?
Yeah, an actual question that has an answer. I can. That's not something that's breaking. Uh, so typically, and this is weird because like all the Microsoft guidance around DevOps and how you deploy code is typically tied to workspaces. So if, with a medallion architecture, what I would probably end up doing would be having, and it would depend if you're willing to duplicate data assets, and that's where it gets a little bit tricky. But typically, I would have one workspace for each bronze, silver, gold, platinum per environment. So like I would have one for dev, one for QA, maybe one for production. And the nice thing about that is you can kind of lock down production from your uh, deployment workflow. So as you're deploying code, you're not deploying it directly into production. You can kind of have that gated. Uh, Interestingly, this is where I like to use domains. It's not a perfect solution, but you can use domains to allow developers to create workspaces and say a development domain. And maybe they don't have those same rights in QA or obviously production, but you can use domains to give more rights to those devs in those lower tiers. I like that approach. I don't think it's perfect, but it's kind of the best workaround to what we have in place.
Perfect. Next question is, what goal KPIs would you propose for data governance implementation in a retailer company's group?
That's a good question. The main ones I see for a retailer, it's a good example of where you're going to have like a pretty traditional data warehouse. You don't have like a lot of streaming data inherently. Uh, I really like those month end, those especially if your month end or quarter end doesn't look good. Obviously, there's a little bit of strategy in how you define your KPIs, and you want to define places where you're going to see clear improvement. And some of that might be, you could even potentially tie it to promotional activity too, to see what kind of results you get from promotions. But you're going to want to identify places where you're currently really weak and that you think improving a process will help you improve this. And typically month end and quarter end are a good place to do that because a lot of times we'll see organizations aren't good at those things. But just keep that in mind and work through there and be strategic about how you choose those key KPIs. Don't just choose something I told you to do. You want to evaluate what's poor in your organization and what you think you can improve, because you want your project to be successful, and that's one of the ways you help it be successful.
Perfect. And the next question is, according to you, can I implement RLS on a lakehouse level?
I don't remember. The question is row level security on a lakehouse. I know you can do it in the warehouse because it has the SQL Server. It's data warehouse. I don't remember if that's available on a lakehouse or if you have to do a workaround in your semantic model in order to do that. And then I know that's messy. I believe that to be the case. I don't know for a fact. I'd have to look that up.
Perfect. The next question there is, what should come first, data culture or data governance?
Data culture. You're not going to have the support you need in your organization if you to do a data governance project, because they're hard and they're messy and they piss people off if you don't have a culture of data. And a data governance project can be the start of getting you a culture of data, but you have to get to that point first.
Perfect. So the next question there is, regarding security and access within Fabric, would you recommend assigning roles in brackets admin, contributor, member, viewer, or to the corresponding security groups in Entra, i.e. workspace, name, admin?
Yeah, I mean, I'm a role-based access control is what you always want to do. It's just pretty limited into the level of granularity we have in Fabric, and that's good. I before you get to the point where you're talking about how to do it in Fabric, and I think that's a good start because you're thinking there. You want to think about the actual technical tasks that people need to do and kind of work backwards from there and just map that back and where you need to limit things. And typically that's a good start. It's a simple method. I wish we had more granular control over things. I like the Azure model a little bit more than the Fabric model, but I think maybe they'll eventually get there, but we'll see.
Perfect. And the next question there is, Fabric data lineage only shows dependencies on lakehouse / notebook level, not the dependency from one table to another, correct? Does Purview know dependencies on table level, example comparable to Databricks Unity catalog?
Uh, I do not believe it does. I think that's an example of one of the places where Databricks Unity catalog is a lot more mature than the Purview Fabric model. That's another good example there of where they're, and then to be fair, that tool's been around for a little bit longer, a few years longer. But yeah, that's something that where there is a gap with Fabric.
Perfect. And the next question there is, if my organization has Informatica for data management, including data governance, 1, is that compatible with Fabric? 2, what Microsoft Pure will give me over Informatica from data governance perspective? Thank you.
Well, good question, because Informatica was bought this morning by Salesforce. So
Oh,
yeah, good luck with that going forward. This is one of those messy solutions I was talking about earlier, where enterprises end up having every tool. Purview is going to give you some specific Fabric capability that Informatica is not going to support, especially since they're going through a merger right now, because I don't see them building a Fabric product while Salesforce is acquiring them. And it's one of those scenarios where you end up with having multiple data catalogs across your organization, and you end up having to build this holistic model on top of that. I don't think that's either a good or a bad thing. It's just something that happens. You're going to have limited support in Informatica for Fabric. You're probably going to be able to tie it to things that it can connect to with a SQL endpoint. It's going to see how well it can work or not. But you, depending on your needs and how you're doing governance in Informatica, you may be able to do that all in Informatica. You may need to engage Purview, and that's a perfect example of how this organizational sprawl of tools can happen then.
perfect. Next question is, in Fabric, when we shortcut data from one workspace to another workspace, is it possible to govern the lineage view across workspaces with these shortcuts?
So as long as it's across one level, so as long as you're not shortcutting to a shortcut, the lineage view will show the shortcutted data and where it lives. But I think if you go to a second level, you would have to drill down in order to see that lineage view.
Perfect. That's all the time we have. Is it okay if people mess you privately on LinkedIn?
Yeah, feel free. My email's right here. If you have any further questions, just shoot me an email.
Amazing. Thank you, Joseph. So on behalf of the ESPC community, we'd like to send a big thank you to you again, Joseph, for taking time out today to carry this webinar. Really appreciate it.
Thank you. Have a great evening, everyone.
Yeah, so that's the end of today's webinar. You can find this webinar and more at sharepointeurope.com/resource center. Thanks again for all of you joining us again, and hope you join us again soon. Take care.
Bye.